For decades, the British Empire tried to crush a resistance movement in Anioma land. But the fighters they were chasing had no capital to capture, no king to arrest, and no army standing in one place. The resistance moved like a shadow through forests, villages, and hidden paths. The British called it Ekumeku. But the first gunshot did not begin the resistance. It had started long before that, in whispers beneath moonlit compounds, in silent refusals at village gatherings, and in the growing realization that something sacred was being taken. By the time the British understood what they were facing, the fire had already spread. It had a name: Ekumeku. The intrusion did not come all at once. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, along the banks of the Niger River. Foreign traders arrived first, representing powerful European companies such as the Royal Niger Company. They came not as conquerors but as merchants, seeking palm oil, kernels, and access to inland trade routes. At first, the relationship appeared mutually beneficial. Anioma traders exchanged goods as they had always done. Markets continued to thrive. Trade routes remained active. But beneath this surface of cooperation, something had begun to change. Trade was no longer simply trade. It was becoming control. By the late 19th century, the Royal Niger Company had begun to assert authority far beyond commerce. Backed by the British Crown, it imposed treaties on local communities, agreements written in foreign terms and rarely understood by those who signed them. These treaties claimed land, they dictated trade, they undermined indigenous authority. Soon, British officials followed. What had begun as economic presence transformed into political domination. The British introduced new systems of governance that clashed sharply with Anioma traditions. Warrant chiefs were appointed, individuals given authority not by lineage, wisdom, or communal consent, but by colonial approval. This was a direct assault on the Anioma system. The authority of the Eziani, the voice of the Umuna, and the moral force of the Umuada were ignored within the colonial framework. Decision-making was no longer collective, it was imposed. And then came taxation. The British demanded that the Anioma people pay taxes in a currency system that was unfamiliar and often inaccessible. To enforce this, they required participation in a colonial economy that disrupted traditional livelihoods. Palm oil, once a symbol of economic independence, became a controlled commodity. Trade routes were redirected, prices were manipulated, local autonomy began to erode. To the British, these were administrative measures. To the Anioma people, they were violations. For a society built on balance, these disruptions were more than political. They were spiritual. The land was not just property. It was sacred earth, the resting place of ancestors. Authority was not simply leadership, it was ancestral continuity. To surrender these was to break the very fabric of existence. Tension grew across Anioma communities. Meetings were held in hushed tones. Elders gathered, age grades listened. The Umuada watched closely as the balance of society began to tilt. The question was no longer whether change had come, it was whether it would be accepted. The answer, increasingly, was no. Out of this growing resistance emerged a movement unlike anything the British had encountered. It was not a single army, it was not led by a crowned king, it had no central capital to conquer. It was a network, a force, a spirit of defiance. This was Ekumeku. The word itself carried weight, often associated with an unseen and powerful presence, something that moved in the shadows and struck without warning. The Ekumeku resistance spread across Anioma land, uniting communities in a shared determination to defend their way of life. What made it formidable was its structure, or rather, its lack of a single visible structure. There was no central leader for the British to capture, no headquarters to destroy, no single point of failure. Instead, leadership was distributed. Local groups organized themselves. Fighters were drawn from age grades, lineage groups, and allied communities. Decisions were made collectively, often in secrecy, guided by trusted elders and warriors. The movement operated through coordination rather than command. In many ways, it reflected the very structure of Anioma society. What made Ekumeku even more difficult to defeat was the way it fought. The fighters understood their terrain intimately: dense forests, hidden paths, and winding river networks. Rather than engaging in open confrontation, they launched sudden attacks on colonial outposts, disrupted British trade routes, and targeted symbols of foreign authority. Then they vanished. into the forests, into the villages, into the land itself. To British forces, the enemy was everywhere, and nowhere at once. Communication within the resistance moved through trusted networks, coded language, and cultural signals that outsiders could not easily interpret. The British, accustomed to conventional warfare, suddenly faced a conflict they could not easily understand. This was not a traditional war. It was resistance woven into everyday life. And the strength of this resistance did not lie only in its fighters. It lived within the people. Villagers provided food, shelter, and information. Women played vital roles, carrying messages, protecting secrets, and holding communities together as the struggle intensified. The Umuada, long respected as moral authorities, reinforced unity and prevented divisions that could weaken the movement. Spiritual belief also strengthened the resistance. Dubias performed rituals of protection and guidance. Fighters entered battle, believing they were defending not just land, but the will of their ancestors. This gave the struggle a deeper meaning. It was not merely political, it was existential. The British response was swift and severe. Unable to easily defeat the Ekumeku fighters in open battle, colonial forces turned to harsher tactics. Villages suspected of supporting the resistance were attacked. Homes were burned. Crops were destroyed. The goal was simple: break the will of the people. Force submission through fear and pressure. Expeditions pushed deeper into Anioma territory. Warrant chiefs were empowered further. Informants were encouraged, and divisions were exploited wherever possible. But the Ekkomechu did not disappear. It adapted. Each attempt at suppression was met with renewed resistance. What the British had expected to be a brief assertion of authority became a prolonged and exhausting war. Year after year, the Ekumeku resistance endured, frustrating colonial forces and proving that Anioma land could not be easily subdued. But even as the forests shielded them and the people stood united, the British were learning, adapting, and preparing something far more devastating than anything that had come before. The war was about to change. Strategies would shift, alliances would be tested, and the resistance that had survived for decades would face its greatest threat yet. Because every movement, no matter how powerful, eventually meets a moment that decides its fate. Did the Ekumeku finally fall, or did they leave behind something the British could never destroy? The story is not over. The final chapter is where everything changes. Stay with me.